Hi guys, this afternoon we're going to do a little extension on our work on linear functions. Alright, here's the situation. I need a new mobile phone plan. And Glabe is offering a plan of 600 pesos per month if I don't spend more than, should be a then, 2,000 pesos on calls and texts. Okay, that might be okay. But hang on, it says if I do spend in excess of 2,000 pesos, I have to pay an extra fee of 10% of the amount over 2,000 pesos that I spend. Okay, that's a lot of words there. I'm going to see what that looks like graphically. Let me see if that sort of helps me get my head around what this looks like. Okay, so let me have a look here. If I spend 500 pesos per month, that tells me that I'm only going to pay 600 pesos. 600. What if I spend 1,000 pesos per month? Once again, if I'm not going over my 2,000 pesos of calls, I'm only paying 600 pesos. Okay. In fact, even if I spend 2,000 pesos per month, I'm only paying 600 pesos. Okay, so let's see what that looks like here. Alright, I've got my two axes. What is my X and Y axis here? What would this represent? Well, the cost of my plan is going to depend on the amount of calls and texts I spend. So here's my calls and texts, and here's the cost of my plan. Okay, so let's go and have a little look at what this might look like now. Right up to this special point of 2,000 pesos, that's a really important point there, I have a fixed rate of a plan of only 600 pesos. So it doesn't matter whether I spend 100, 500, 1,000, 1,800, I'm paying 600 peso flat rate. So we seem to have a horizontal line there. But it's really important, something special happens after this 2,000 peso point. So if we go back over here, it says if I spend more than my 2,000, I've got to spend an extra 10%. So for example, if I spend 3,000 pesos per month, I've got my 600 peso base rate, but I also have 10% of the excess. So I've got an extra 1,000 pesos there, so I have to pay an extra 10% of 1,000, an extra tenth of 1,000. So there's an extra 100 pesos. So if I spend 3,000 a month, I've got my base rate of 600 plus 100. So alright, so now I've got an increased cost of my plan. And it seems to be the more I spend, I've got to keep paying 10% of them. So am I going to have a decreasing, a horizontal, or an increasing piece here? Yeah, it's going to be increasing like this, isn't it? Will it stop anywhere? In other words, is there an upper bound on the amount I can spend on calls and texts? No, absolutely not. So I'm going to put an arrow there indicating it can go on infinitely, spending more, having a greater cost of my plan. Okay, so let's now introduce some function work with it. It says state the independent variable. So what did we let this be? X was the calls and texts, wasn't it? Okay, so let's introduce some algebra here. Let X equals the cost of calls and texts. And of course the dependent, that should be dependent there, the cost of the plan depends on the amount of calls and texts. So I want to bring in some function notation. Let's call that CX, cost of plan for X amount of calls and text. Okay, so we've got our variables, cost of plan. Alright, I'm just going to put that key information on here. I've got my nice flat rate of 600 all the way up to the fact that I get to 2,000. Then I start showing my increase. Okay, it says find these values and explain what their meaning is. So C of 800, what's that actually asking? Well, here the X is 800. So it's saying if my calls and texts are only 800 pesos, what is the cost of my plan? So if I come over here to my graph, 800 pesos is somewhere here, isn't it? So we can see very clearly I'm under my 2,000 pesos, so the cost of my plan is going to be 600 pesos there. Alright, but cost of 2,500 worth of calls. Well, I can see that's over my magic 2,000, isn't it? So it's over here. What I can see straight away is it's going to be more than 600. I suppose the question is, how do we figure out what the cost actually is? Well, with a little bit of math, our excess there is 500. So I've got 10% of 500. There's an extra 50 pesos. So I've got my 600 base rate plus an extra 50. So there is my 650 pesos. Okay, so let's just put that. That actually indicates a point on my graph here, my piecewise graph. 2,500 and 650. Definitely, so this value over here, 650 now. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Now we're going to bring some algebra into it again. It says write an equation of the piecewise graph. Well, that's going to be pretty hard because we actually have two physical pieces. We've got this piece here, which is a very different model to this second piece over here. So I'm going to put this key value in. It's important to me. That was our key value of 2,600. That was our CX axis and our X axis. Okay, so I want to get an equation model for CX. But I've got two pieces, so all I do is I get an equation for each piece. Alright, well obviously we've got a horizontal line with a y-intercept of 600. We know that should be the equation y equals something, but in this case we're using function notation. So we'll have CX equals 600. For this piece of our graph, we've done that. Alright, but what about the green piece of our graph? We know we have an increasing linear relationship, so somehow we've got to get the equation of that. Now, you could go and get a couple of points. We just had the point 2,500, 650. You could go and get another point. You could get the slope and all that, but I think we can logically work this one out. Okay, so let's start off. Our CX, we start with 600 pesos, and we are adding 1/10 of the amount in excess of 2,000. So how do we work out the amount excess of 2,000? It's going to be 2,000 minus X, and that'll show us how much extra we've got. So now we can write that down. We've got 600 plus 1/10, I'm going to write 0.1 of 2,000 minus X, and that'll give us our excess amount there. But hang on, I'm a little bit confused because I've got two graphs here. This graph is only relevant between 0. I can spend 0 a month if I don't call anyone or text anyone. It's still going to cost me 600 though. All the way up here to 2,000. But if I spend 2,000 on calls and text, I still pay 600. So I have to indicate on my equation of this restricted domain, we say. So this function exists only for x is greater than or equal to 0, but less than or equal to 2,000. And as soon as we get to 2,000, the function changes here, and it becomes this. So I put my comma there, run out of space there. This exists for x's greater than 2,000. Now you just told me before there is no endpoint here. This can go infinitely up in that direction depending on how much I want to spend on my calls and texts. So now we've got an equation for our graphical model. Let's go back and have a look at what these things are meaning again. Okay, we've got C of 600. C of 600, 600's in here. We know the cost of that is going to be 600. But if I come up here, I can say, all right, my x value is 600. So which one of these functions is relevant? Is 600 between 0 and 2,000, or is 600 greater than? Well, obviously it's between here. So since the x is in this domain, this is the function I'm using. So that's where my 600's coming from. This one down here, though, it says when x equals 2,500. So I come up here. We saw before 2,500 is up here. We had that point. We know that that value over there was 650. We've got this before. We've done this. But let's just have a look what algebraically it looks like. So if I come here, I say, right, is 2,500 between 0 and 2,000? Well, obviously not. Or is it greater than 2,000? We know it's in this one. So I'm actually going to use this function to calculate it. So I'd have 600 plus 0.1 times 2,000 minus, or it should be the other way around, 2,500 minus 2,000. So we've got 600 plus 0.1 of 500. Just let me make that correction up there. That should be x minus 2,000. Okay, so if we do a little bit of math here, a tenth of 500 is 50. That's where our 650 pesos come from. Alright, what about this one down here? This time we know the cost of my plan's 1,500. Cost is 1,500. Wow, somewhere way up here. I know I'm spending more than my 2,000 pesos. But algebraically I can go here and say, okay, obviously it's got to be this function I'm looking at, because I know it's got to be x has to be greater than 2,000 pesos. So I've got this. I've got 1,500 pesos is equal to 600 plus 0.1 times x. So we've got 0.1 x minus 2,000. All we have to do there is a little bit of algebra to figure out what that x is. A bit of expanding and simplifying, solve that equation for x. I'll skip that bit, you guys can do that. And as we saw before, we would end up with, we don't know what that one is doing. We should do that. So let's take 600 away from both sides. We've got 1,900 is equal to 0.1x minus 200. Take that 200 over there, so we've got 2,100 equals 0.1x. Divide by 0.1. Dividing by a tenth is the same as multiplying by 10. So 2,100 times 10 is actually 21,000. So in fact, for me to have a plan costing 1,500, that means I must have spent 21,000 pesos on calls and text. I hope that never happens. Alright guys, I hope that's given you a bit of an idea. I'd like you just to have a look at this question here. I've given you a piecewise function. This is what I'd like you to do with it. A nice simple one. 2 linear branches there. Let's put an arrow on there. We've got an x-axis here. Let's call this, let's bring some function notation. Let's call that fx. I would like you to be able to find the equation. In other words, could you get an expression for the two pieces of the graph here, piece 1 and piece 2, for this function? Secondly, I would like you to work out what the function of 2.5 is, what the function of 9 is, and find the x value so that the function of x is equal to negative 10. Alright, have a go at those couple of questions and I'll see you in class soon. Have fun!